Hi, today we're interviewing Director of Regulatory Services, Enrique Velazquez. Introduction. This interview was important to us because we wanted to determine for ourselves whether Mr. Velazquez was as problematic as the vocal and belligerent defenders of homeless encampments have made him out to be. We're at a point in city politics where it has become acceptable to harass elected officials and government employees with whom we disagree. Technology enables a few individuals to send thousands of text messages, emails, and phone calls, which can skew perceptions of what residents consider priorities. When these technologies fail to achieve the desired response, people have resorted to showing up at the homes of officials and threatening them. These tactics are counterproductive and delay solutions to complicated and urgent problems that require collaboration, openness, and negotiation for progress to be made. In this interview, Mr. Velazquez corrects our use of the term sweeps. He believes the term fails to recognize the careful planning involved with closures and the efforts of people attempting to provide services to encampment inhabitants. There are 4 determining factors used when deciding whether to close an encampment, which are discussed in the interview. Advocates for allowing the encampments to remain often minimize the damaging effects of substance abuse, sex trafficking, and violence the encampments can have on both the people living in them and nearby residents. Ignoring or dismissing these concerns ensures their voices will be ignored, leading to a stalemate. There is no simple solution to ending homelessness in our city. Dialogue must begin with the assumption that everyone involved wants a humane solution. It's okay to disagree. However, the dialogue must continue, and new ideas and proposals will have to be considered if we are going to break the cycle we are in. This won't happen when people are afraid to speak for fear of harassment. Mr. Velazquez says he wants the approach to encampments to include kindness and humanity. Minneapolis could have an administrator with a much less sympathetic attitude. If we start the conversation assuming that Mr. Velazquez is sincere, we'll get closer to finding a solution. It's possible that the nature of online interaction is contributing to the rigid and epileptic tone of many exchanges. Anonymity allows users to vent their emotions without considering the human beings receiving their messages. Social media does not encourage the deep and subtle thinking required to solve complex problems. If you wouldn't say it to someone face to face, it's probably a good indicator that you shouldn't espouse it on social media. Demonizing those with whom we disagree creates a space where we extract their humanity, allowing us to treat them without respect. It lets us ignore the life experiences and knowledge that person possesses that brought them to their position, whatever that might be. We can all take steps to prevent seeing people we disagree with as objects. When we speak of wanting to see bipartisan action by elected officials, it begins with how we conduct ourselves in our everyday lives. Topics in the interview include regulatory services overview, encampment closures, restaurant and business regulations, and whether there is a gap for the new regulatory body to fill, pet adoption. We also want to cover some feedback notes that we've had. Reparation commissions. The Juneteenth newsletter, Reparation Commissions, generated a lot of feedback. From some of the responses, it was obvious that people did not read the entire newsletter. For the many who did, it seems we could have been more clear. We may publish a follow-up, but we wanted to summarize a few things. First, we do believe that the wealth gap is a significant problem in our city. The cycle of poverty impacts more than just black residents, but since the Chicago Reparation Commission was focused on black Americans and it was Juneteenth, we chose to address inherited poverty for this demographic. Second, we are skeptical of reparation commissions and think they can be a means for politicians to virtue signal by creating them. Third, our suggestions for how to address poverty were meant to encourage debate. It wasn't an exhaustive list. Some of the suggestions, it was pointed out to us, would not be possible to implement on a city level. However, the intention was to convey that there are actions we can take now to reduce poverty, actions that would help both those in poverty and those more fortunate. We do not need to wait for reparation committees to complete their studies. We made the mistake of assuming that readers would agree with the first point, that the wealth gap is a persistent problem. In our follow-up newsletter, we will spend more time documenting the facts behind education, home ownership, and savings that led us to this conclusion. The $13 million remodel. We have also been asked to clarify our newsletter, the $13 million remodel. After the newsletter was published, the budget item was referred back to committee for further research and will be discussed in the Tuesday, June 25th Administration and Enterprise Oversight Committee meeting. The title for this item indicates one room is being remodeled. However, if you look into the background analysis, more than one room is being remodeled. I quote from LIMS, "This contract is for Phase 2 of the Minneapolis Convention Center Meeting Room Remodel Project, which will update all finishes as well as the technology in meeting rooms 101, 102, M100, M101, and L100. Wall panel systems will also be replaced in the L100 and M100 meeting rooms." We have since been informed, but have yet to verify, that a total of 39 rooms are being remodeled. This scope is not documented in what the City Council was asked to approve. We would like to see greater transparency around the budget and scope of the project, and are actively trying to find time to meet with Jeff Johnson, Executive Director of the Minneapolis Convention Center. Regardless of whether it is one room, several, or 39, we find the price tag to be high. To give some perspective, the state legislature approved $12.5 million for the new Community Performing Arts Center, an 8,000-seat amphitheater to be built as part of the Upper Harbor Terminal project. And without further ado, the interview follows. So let's get started. I'm wondering if you could give me an overview of regulatory services. I know it covers a lot of divisions and departments. I know it covers the animal control. I've heard a lot about that lately. But I'd love to hear from you about your department and size and that.
Certainly. Yeah, overall, regulatory services, basically we safeguard the health, the safety, the livability of all Minneapolis residents, both human and animal. And we do that through regulation, inspection, and then ultimately code compliance with local and other applicable laws and codes of ordinance. We consist of basically 4 divisions: animal care and control, which is about 35 people. We have traffic control, which is about 70. Our inspections division, which covers housing inspections, so single family, duplexes, and triplexes. Our strategic inspections group that focuses on vacant and boarded properties or those that are on a path towards that. And then fire inspections, which covers residential properties that are 4 units and above, because the codes are a little bit different. And it gets into the high rises, commercial buildings, mixed use buildings, propane tanks, and a bunch of other nuanced areas that all get down to safety, public health. And then the 4th division is more of the backbone. That's our operations and engagement. It's about 35 people. They handle all of the letters that go out to residents with respect to violation notices or citations. They handle the administrative appeals process for all of regulatory services and other departments. They also do a lot of community engagement work. So all of the activities that you mentioned before for animal care and control, it's this operations and community engagement group that focuses on helping animal care and control stand those up and make sure that they're successful and we get the saturation and reach that we're looking for within community.
So can I just ask you a couple of specifics about those things? When I get a notice that I haven't shoveled my trash can, is that your department? From the snow? Or is that someone else?
Where's your trash can?
In the alley. In the
Yes.
alley, right?
Okay. So in the alley, I believe that's Public Works.
Okay. All right.
Traffic control also, they will patrol the alleyways. But I believe it's Public Works that handles those specific snow complaints.
Okay. Because when I told people I was interviewing you, that was one of the questions. All right, great. And the last one kind of surprises me, the fire inspection. How come that's not? I would have thought that was the fire department.
Yes, years ago, they were part of the fire department, or that work was within the fire department. And then due to different constraints, trying to address fires and handle other emergency management situations, that work split off and then just evolved into what's now today the fire inspections subdivision of inspections.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you can talk about the housing inspection one. I know I saw there was like a lawsuit about trying to get more inspections done, particularly on the north side. Is that still ongoing, do you know? Or
Yes, that lawsuit is still ongoing with our city attorney's office. So they would probably be in a better position to be able to respond to what's going on there. I wouldn't really be in position to answer that.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I asked about the alleyways. I just didn't know if there was any other just examples of the type of laws and ordinances that your regulatory services would handle, and then like what's probably your most common interaction with the public? Like what do people call about the most, or that kind of thing?
Absolutely. We see a wide range of different calls that come through. And Minneapolis 311 is that central conduit where we receive a lot of the different calls or service requests. It might be situations where somebody didn't shovel their driveway or their sidewalk. Well, we would see those because there's an ordinance in the books that requires that those areas be shoveled within so many hours or so many days of the snow finally ending.
So your operations department would send out those kind of letters?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. We would get those.
And 311 is they would take a call and then they would decide this needs to go to your department. Is that how it works?
Right. So with 311, they're that central conduit. It's almost like the switchboard of days gone past, where they have a number of different scripts outlining how to respond to different questions, who's responsible, and they partner with every single department around the city on developing these scripts so that we can make sure that the resident or whoever the caller is, they get the most accurate information at that first point of contact, whether it's a phone call or whether they use the Minneapolis 311 app to file the complaint or look for information. So 311 will look at the information, triage it, and then allocate it to the appropriate department. We all have service level agreements set up that define how quickly we need to be able to respond to those different inquiries. Not necessarily address them, but at least be able to respond to them and start working on those different cases. And the constituents can then look up their case, see what the status is, see where things stand, and if any additional follow-up is needed, they have that opportunity for back and forth. Some of the different issues we'll see are nuisance complaints, exterior, trash in somebody's yard that isn't getting collected.
Noise, is that one?
Noise, we don't necessarily receive the noise complaints, depending on the
police,
type of.
Maybe?
It would be depending on the type of noise. So if it's, let's say it's a Sunday brunch downtown and there's a restaurant that has a rooftop patio and there's amplified sound and it exceeds the decibel level, that would be more of an environmental sound, environmental health within the Minneapolis Health Department that would receive that complaint. If it's a barking dog that's barking incessantly, that would be our animal control department that would handle that.
Okay.
So it all depends on what's the type of noise. Is it residential versus business, or is it a mixed use space where there's a blend of residential and businesses? Because then our business licensing unit within community planning and economic development might also play a role there as well.
Okay, so 311's got a big job then, really, to figure out like which department is impacted and to get the request routed.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And in some cases, it's not terribly clear, and they might just send it over to one of us departments to help them figure that out, and then we partner together to get the right people onto the right case so that we can address whatever the issue is for the constituent.
Okay. And just the top three things, or one or two. You mentioned the sidewalk. What would be another couple of big ones?
Absolutely. Abandoned vehicles.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
kind of a tougher one. By ordinance, a vehicle that remains parked on the city street in a legal spot for longer than 3 days is considered to be abandoned. So traffic control gets involved in those cases. They'll go out and mark the tires, track time, and then if that vehicle hasn't moved, then we'll authorize a tow.
Yeah.
If the vehicle moves even slightly, or it moves into a different spot, or the tires in it are in a different orientation, even if it's in the same spot now, it might be harder to try and find those different abandoned vehicles, or the shade tree mechanics that are doing work out of the home or on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the challenging situations for us to try and solve for community members who are calling because of excessive noise or different activities that are happening because there's a shade tree mechanic right next door.
Right. It occurs to me, like, so if the traffic control, I know, and maybe these are in place already, are the cameras that are going to take pictures of speeders or maybe people running red lights. Would that fall into your area?
Yes, that's right. That will fall into my area. It's currently a pilot that we're working through. It hasn't started yet, but we're working through the details of how to stand up that pilot. And it's taking a look at law enforcement, or reshaping law enforcement, so that we can have our law enforcement officers focused on the more serious activities, while non-sworn officers can handle some of these other activities that have traditionally been handled by police officers.
So are there, I guess the traffic control that you see, like in the actual cars and stuff, those people fall under regulatory services?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, it's good to know. I would assume that they were under the police, so that's good to know. And okay, I think my next question you sort of answered, like how do people get hold of your department? It seems like that's going through 311, right?
Right.
Now, I know that you're involved with the encampments. I wonder if you could just describe, to the extent and how what's your interaction with the encampments?
Certainly. So at a very top level, regulatory services is pretty much that container that holds the overall process and framework for the city's response to unsheltered homelessness. We're not the only ones who have a stake in this work. We partner with a number of different departments around the city, from Minneapolis Police Department to Community Planning and Economic Development, the Health Department, Public Works. There are many hands that and many voices that have a seat at this table to try and help us get to a place where we are addressing encampments, and really we're trying to figure out ways to address unsheltered homelessness.
So just to sort of put it in perspective, it seems like it's very hard to get like an actual count, which makes sense of how many encampments there are, unsheltered people. So I'm just wondering, like, if you have that information, like where you think the situation's at. Is it 469, which is a number I've seen cited a couple of times, but maybe it's gone down for the summer or up? And I read today there's 22 encampments. Do those figures kind of fit in what you know, or?
Yes, those figures do fit in with what we know. We partner very closely with Hennepin County and their Housing Stability Office on homelessness response. Hennepin County is the overseer of the continuum of care for the area. So we make a concerted effort to make sure that the city's response fits in with the county's continuum of care, partnering with them, partnering with their social service organizations that they fund. We also provide some additional funding to help stand up that work.
And there's some sort of, and I'm not sure the name of it, but there's a committee that meets in these different departments to talk over these things, right?
Yes, there sure is.
Yeah, because it certainly sounds complicated, kind of given the number of areas involved. Yeah,
absolutely, very complicated, and really there's 4 specific factors that we look at when we evaluate an encampment and make a determination on will this encampment be the next one to close or will it not. We look at number 1, what's the neighborhood impact, the impact to the immediate surrounding neighbors. Secondly, health. Mm-hmm. What are some of the different things that are going on? Is it summertime where we're going to see extreme heat and the people that are in this location within this community in this surrounding neighborhood, are they going to be adversely impacted because of the neighborhood they're in, or vice versa? Are they going to impact the neighborhood that they're in because of the activities in the encampment? Same thing with wintertime, where we see a number of yurts that are erected and a lot of fires that are burning within the encampment to help people stay warm. There are health effects for the individuals there as well as the immediate neighbors and those that are surrounding that, depending on the blend of that neighborhood. We saw it firsthand where the fire and smoke from the encampment impacted a diagnostic lab's ability to run tests for seniors and others who went to the lab to have their lab work and their blood work diagnosed for future treatment. So there are lots of other compounding factors there. The third thing we look at is security and safety. What are the impacts that we're seeing come through either through 311 complaints or through 911 calls for service that might elevate the level of risk for the people in the encampment as well as the immediate neighbors. Fourth are other environmental considerations. Are there schools nearby? Are there other vulnerable adults or those that are working really hard to get out of homelessness themselves or to overcome their substance use that are adversely affected because of the presence of the encampment and some of the other activities that might be happening at one location versus another. So we look at all those factors and make determinations on, can we allow that encampment to stay open, or do we need to press further and close the encampment and work with the individuals inside the encampment to help them find shelter?
So I think a lot of people kind of, point to the mayor as determining that when it's time to close an encampment. Is that something you jointly decide, or is that your decision, or how does that, or is it multiple people that decide on those things?
Right. Again, we look at those specific 4 factors, and then when it elevates to a level where we need to close it, we will make that decision. There might be safety risks that just seem to come to the forefront that necessitate closure because it places individuals in the encampment or in the immediate surrounding vicinity at imminent risk and danger. And in those situations, we will just move forward with closure of the encampment just to disrupt the behavior that's happening there.
Right. I think I read, the recent one was read at 28th and Columbus, and there was some gunshots or something there.
Yes, that's right.
Did the police tell you, like, hey, there's been some gunshots here, or how do you get that information?
Yes.
311.
Right. So in those situations, we do, Minneapolis Police Department, they do have a seat at that table that I mentioned before where we collectively meet and discuss what's going on. Sometimes it's an emergent situation where there isn't that time to stand up the team. We wouldn't necessarily want to wait for that team to come together, and it's more of messaging that, hey, there's this significant event that's happening. We need to move forward with closure now. And one thing I want to say is that there are kind of different levels of response, if you will. We have private property and private property owners who have encampments on their property. As a city, we can't necessarily go into that property and move forward with removing the encampment independently. That property owner has rights over what happens on their land, and we need them to partner with us or to step forward and say, I need this closed. That's where the Minneapolis Police Department or other partners might come alongside with that property owner to help them come up with a plan and move forward with closure, which is the case of what we saw at the 28th and Columbus Avenue encampment. On city-owned property, it's a little bit different, where the city has the services as well as are the property owners. So in that case, we can move forward and don't have the additional step of working through a third party like we would if it were on a different government agency's property or railroad property or something of that nature, where we have that extra nuance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember, I drove by that encampment and I was a little shocked at the amount of firewood they were delivering to it. It was a lot. And then I read recently that there's was under consideration hiring some private security to kind of monitor. And do you know, is that still in the works? I think it said that there was an RFP out for it. Is that still happening, or has that already been filled? Or
yes, that specific RFP for private security has already been awarded. And one of the areas of focus was that while the city has a police presence, we do have city security on staff as well. What we were missing was that additional ability to trespass on city-owned property. That's one of the areas where the private security contractor can serve as an agent representative of the city that isn't just plainclothes staff and isn't as armed of a response as law enforcement. It's something between that can step into the space, give verbal notice of trespass, and then help provide some access to resources to the individuals that are on those sites. So as they see them pop up, they have the agency to go in, advise them that they're trespassing and that they need to move to a different location.
And so that could have only been operational for a few months or so, right?
Yes, that's right.
So is it too early to say what the result has been or how people have reacted to that? Or
well, just to provide some anecdotal information, the focus from yesterday has been on the 28th and Columbus encampment closure. Right. There were 5 other encampments that were closed yesterday that utilized private security.
Okay.
So overall, it's fairly non-controversial to have them serve as agents of the city that are providing good information, approaching with kindness, and addressing people with humanity and respect, which they 100% deserve. So I think there's really not much of a risk so far, and community members have responded favorably.
And what's the group that was contracted, or is it multiple groups?
It's a single group. Unparalleled Security is the name of the contractor.
Okay. So, you mentioned, and obviously the encampments are very controversial. I've heard people that are just frustrated that any sweeps are being done, and then kind of on the other end of the spectrum, there's people that say we should arrest the people who live in the encampments and force them into some sort of drug rehab or mental health program. How do you balance kind of that wide spectrum of what people would like to see?
Certainly. And before I answer, I'd like to even just address the language. Because when I think of sweep, I think of taking a broom and completely wiping away everybody that was there and everything in it. And that's not really the reality of what's happening in these situations. We have homeless response coordinators that spend quite a bit of time at the encampments. They're in encampments 5 days a week, addressing and interacting with individuals to try and connect them with services. Case managers descend on every single encampment looking to provide case management work and help individuals exercise their agency to move and help them get ready to move into shelter or housing.
Thanks for clarifying. I didn't mean to dismiss like the services you're providing or anything like that.
To address, there is a wide chasm of individuals on both sides of each side of the spectrum here on allow these individuals to remain in place, to lock them up and force them into treatment. And to those individuals that just want to keep them in place, there's a thought that comes to mind, and it's that in Minneapolis, we have a really robust housing standard. It sets the minimum housing standard for safety, security, livability, and quality of the space that people should live in, whether it's an owner-occupied space, whether it's a renter-occupied space, even vacant buildings. We have requirements for vacant buildings. And the part I struggle with is, while we have all these things in place, how can we as a people say that it's okay to have a whole nother class where it's okay for individuals to not have a warm, safe space to sleep, and that it's okay for them to live on the ground? I can't accept that. Mm-hmm. And as a city, we can't accept that. That's why it's an ordinance, that we have a minimum housing standard. In addition, we have other codes that say camping or living outdoors in a temporary dwelling structure for the purpose of dwelling is also not allowed. So we have a number of different things that are set up in place.
Can I jump in there? Well, so I do know that and I don't think they've actually published it, but the city council was considering changing some camping ordinances. And then, of course, there's a big Supreme Court decision. I thought maybe they would announce it before I came in here today, and we could talk a little bit about it, but I don't think they have yet, so maybe that'll be next week. But so thinking of the different camping ordinances and stuff, like in your mind, what would be a useful tool to have, or are there ordinances that you think are coming that are going to help or hurt the situation with this?
For sure. That is a tough question. It's very tough because there's so many different factors. And I know the easy thing.
Well, maybe let's limit it down to just the camping ordinance.
Right, for sure.
Do you expect that to change, and how would that maybe change what your department does?
At present, I do not expect that to change. I say that in full recognition that there is a notice of intent to change. The specific code is 244.60, which limits the ability to camp in a temporary dwelling structure. It's the how would we actually be able to enforce that, or how would we be able to sustain that and provide a safe space that's quality housing for individuals that are in the encampments without creating a wide divide between the minimum housing standard and what this becomes. Because working alongside with Hennepin County, we do have a robust shelter system. We have a lot of housing and supports that Hennepin County funds for families, for children, for single adults of all genders. And there are spaces available. So there's also that understanding that we do have spaces available when people choose to exercise that agency. We're also partnering with the tribes and looking at different ways to provide culturally responsive supports and culturally responsive housing so that people can move in cohorts or as a group into housing. Because we recognize that when you're in an encampment, while you might be by yourself in that specific moment, you're surrounded by a community. So how can we help you and help that community that you find and you determine is your family, and help you all navigate through the process? As we've seen in instances where there are individuals who are in encampments who also have access to housing or shelter. And certain ones, from what I've learned is there's a level of guilt. I got housing, but the other people who are part of my support system didn't get that housing. So how can I be over here and start to thrive or start to change in a manner that is better for me when the rest of the people who helped get me here aren't there yet? Mm-hmm. So there's that sense of belonging and returning to the encampment where there is that community until all can move together.
Okay.
So we're looking at a number of different ways, and I think that's a model that really has some opportunity, especially when you wrap around whatever additional supports that people need. And that's really, if I can highlight anything, it's that the focus should be on the people, not on the encampment itself. It's the people, and how do we get them what they need at the time that they need it so that they can realize success in whatever shape that takes for them.
Well, thanks for digging into that. I know it's a complicated topic. I wanted to maybe ask, you mentioned something, this is, kind of moving on from the encampments, but that I've heard in community meetings and from the police, that when there is an abandoned building or like a house and people have moved into it, it's very hard to get people out, right? And I don't know if your department is involved in that at all. Like, I mean, people will change locks, they'll do all kinds of things to kind of keep out the city or the police. And so I'm just wondering, how you would be involved in a situation like that.
Absolutely. That's where our strategic inspections group would also come into play here, as they oversee the vacant buildings and properties. Vacant buildings become an attractive nuisance. They become a point where, to your point, people can break in and kind of claim ownership of them just by occupying them. And when they do, similar to an encampment on a private property, we need to work with a private property owner to give notice of trespass and do all these different things and partner with the police department. In some cases, the reason that the property itself is vacant is because it's an absentee owner, that maybe they're out of state. Maybe they purchased property or they inherited property that from somebody else, and they don't have the ability to hire somebody to maintain it and manage it properly. It could be a situation where the owner of that property has passed away and there are no heirs, in which case we're waiting for that property to go into tax forfeiture and then move to the county for them to take over stewardship of it. So there's a number of different things that happen that lead to why property is not only vacant and abandoned, but why it's not cared for. So our strategic inspections group, they patrol, they go in and check to make sure that properties that are vacant and are on the vacant building registry are still closed to trespass, that the exterior is still maintained, and if they see signs of life on the inside where there shouldn't be, then engage with the police department, engage with our crime prevention specialists, and with the property owner to try and come up with a resolution so that we can bring that building back into compliance and make it not open to trespass anymore. Not only for the immediate, but then also look for solutions to make sure that the property stays closed to trespass. Ideally, that property would be reactivated, a family would move in, or a business would move in, and there would be positive activity that happens that chase away the negative activity.
Yeah. I just know that it's been frustrating for people because there's been some buildings that have burnt down, right? Property owners have had to hire private security to try and guard them, and neighbors have had homes get occupied, and for some of the reasons you mentioned, it's been hard to get whoever's in there out, and so that's not really a question. It's just something I've heard a lot about. Okay, the last one I wanted to ask about was how do you partner with businesses in terms of enforcing regulations and things, because there's been a lot of interest lately in creating like a new regulatory body, particularly for restaurants. So I'm wondering if you, and I know maybe it's too early to say, but I'm just wondering, like, do you enforce, say, business regulations now? And then if you do, how would this new body kind of fit?
For sure. Yeah, so from a business regulation standpoint, there are a number of different entities that are involved in there. If it's a restaurant, it would be business licensing within the Community Planning and Economic Development Department that would oversee the intake of that application for the license. They would partner with the Food, Lodging, and Pools Division of the Health Department, which is also on this floor, on what's the food plan, who's the food manager, what are all the different food requirements, to make sure that, again, we safeguard public health and public safety. If there's an alcohol component, then they would make sure that they, being business licensing, through their delegation agreement with the Department of Public Safety, that the liquor establishment is compact, contiguous, contained, that there's a reasonable plan in place, that they abide by state regulation as well as local regulation, and then also pass through police licensing for background investigations, and to make sure that the owners and the principals who are involved are going to operate the business within the framework of what's allowed in Minneapolis. For other types of businesses, regulatory services plays probably a smaller role with respect to the structure itself. So again, if it's a restaurant and there's a hood, we would make sure that the hood in the kitchen is clean, it's safe, that there's proper ventilation and airflow, so that we can preserve life safety and make sure that a fire doesn't start. And if there is a fire, that they have all of the proper life safety equipment in place to preserve life. Making sure that they follow the occupancy limits, making sure that there's adequate lighting and signage, and that storage is contained into the appropriate areas, so that, again, if there's an emergency, people are able to have the proper egress and can exit with safety and knowing that they're safe, and that there's enough protections within the structure that's fire rated, so that there's those defenses that are built up in place.
So that's quite a few regulations that are in place now. I mean, do you feel like there's a gap that this new regulatory body would be filling? I mean, I guess that's been a lot of the restaurant owners had a press conference recently and said, we don't need this, right?
Right.
So I'm wondering, like, where is the gap that this new organization this new regulatory group would fill, you think? Unless it's just specifically about wages or something, which I don't think you would be involved with.
Correct. Not for wages. That would default to the Department of Labor and Industry, I believe, with a small component that would be within civil rights, which oversees that aspect of regulation. I think we have a very robust regulatory system, especially when you have the overlay with the health department for a variety of different areas, and then also community planning and economic development. We have different enforcement mechanisms in place, and the focus really is on education. We're education forward. We aren't, it's not like the old days. We don't like to drop the hammer unless we absolutely have to. We will educate to the nth degree and make sure that we've done our due diligence and we've done everything absolutely possible to make sure that whoever's affected and whoever is out of compliance they have every opportunity to move back into compliance before we start issuing citations or taking any sort of progressive enforcement actions.
Okay. So if I were going to open a restaurant, do you have any concept of like how many inspections or like I would need, or like regulatory reviews I would go through?
Sure. If it's an existing structure that's already built, then that saves several inspections right off the bat. And it would be at least one within business licensing to inspect your space to make sure it's compact, contiguous, contained, and that it aligns with your business plan. Another two, I'd say, with the health department, food, lodging, and pools to make sure that the food plan is in place and that enough safeguards are in place to preserve public health. And then most likely a sign off from fire inspection services to verify that the occupancy limits are there, that the signage is there, and that nothing has changed in that structure from the time it was built to where you are opening the business, so that all of those different life safety apparatus are in place.
Okay. And so when they talk about, say, opening Nicollet Mall and having, well, I mean, there's all kinds of ideas that have been talked about, you know, between like letting people walk down the street with beer or whatever, mm-hmm. like they've done in some other cities and stuff. Would your department oversee like making sure that whatever rules are put in place are enforced along Nicollet Mall? Or
I think that would be just kind of hypothetically thinking about what it would look like. It would probably be a collaborative effort across multiple departments, the health department, business licensing within community planning and economic development to make sure that there are safeguards with respect to who's actually getting the alcohol, and then occupancy limits are observed and respected. That would come from regulatory services. And then activity within the public right-of-way most likely would be a combination of the Office of Community Safety as well as traffic control, mm-hmm. depending on what that interaction looks like. If people move out of this walkable Nicollet Mall area onto a roadway, that's where traffic control would most likely play a role.
So that sounds kind of complicated, right? So I'm thinking it's not happening this summer for sure. But would planning something like opening Nicollet Mall, would that take like a year? I mean, is that something you think the city could get done by next year, like next summer, if they wanted to do that?
I think if motivated, we had all the players at the table that were looking at what are the outcomes we're looking to accomplish, and we focused on that, it's possible, right?
Okay. So we covered a lot of ground. I just wanted to circle back and see if there's anything that you wanted to cover today or let people know that we haven't discussed at all.
Well, regulatory services, we're about people. Really, that's at the end of it, even though our focus is on upholding laws and regulations from international code to state code to federal, even local. It's about the people, safeguarding communities, safeguarding animals, because we care and we are stewards of the city and public trust. Mm-hmm. So it's very important for us to be able to stand on that and stand out in the community and be out in the community on a regular basis as that conduit in between the city government and individuals in their neighborhoods and their neighbors within the neighborhoods, so that we can make sure that whatever it is that's not in compliance, we help them find a way to bring it back into compliance, or if they feel it's out of compliance, explain what the nuance is and how it is or it isn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And kind of end things on a feel-good note, how is the pet adoption programs going? I've seen. Is that working out? Because
they are. Yes. Yeah. Bless the animal care and control. They do an outstanding job. at engaging with community, at engaging with fosters and foster organizations. It's a dynamic and dynamite group that we work with. I have a few people here in the office that just recently either fostered or adopted animals out of animal care and control. I myself am a foster. We have a few that we've been fostering over a period of time, and yeah, it's
we've been looking at it. I keep checking the site, so that's why I asked. Well, thanks a lot for meeting with me today.
Thank you so much, Terry. Appreciate you.